Hey Megan, this is Psychedelic Actualization. Today we're going to talk about the neuropharmacology of psychedelics. And I'm not alone here because I don't know anything about it. Well, actually I do a little bit, but I'm here with Molly, my friend, and a little bit of an expert in the field. And yeah, short little introduction. Who are you? What are you doing? Why do you know stuff about neuropharmacology of psychedelics?
Yeah, okay. Molly Hickey speaking. I studied pharmacology. Applied this to neuroscience, and then found myself with a mission to use this background to basically revolutionize mental health care, because I'd experienced the pharmacological approach to mental health care firsthand, and felt dissatisfied by what it reflected about our understanding of health and well-being. So I ended up looking to see if anyone was developing psilocybin therapy, because I'd found by surprise that psilocybin was very effective for me at shifting narratives and finding like love and gifts and things that previously been like sources of deep like internal rotting pain stuff. So I worked in drug development for 5 years, just under 5 years in making psilocybin therapy a thing in a medical model. So it was like preclinical research, basically understanding what psilocybin does, what part of what it does is therapeutic, what this indicates about who it might be useful for, and how we can maximize any therapeutic mechanisms.
Nice. And just as you were sharing this, it popped into my mind just like how grateful I am to have met you. And it kind of emphasizes like the importance of inviting those kinds of people into your life. It's like, it's so fun. She invited me out here. Now I'm in Madagascar. Like collaboration is happening, conversation is happening, and it's filling me up so much. So thank you for that. And just to mention the importance of connecting with people and going out into the field and actually like connecting with like-minded folk and bringing that in. And to chime that in there is a psychedelic actualization community. So if you're curious about talking to me, talking with other like-minded individuals on the journey of psychedelic actualization, or talking to Molly, because she's going to chime in there every once in a while and give a presentation or have a Q&A, then you're more welcome to join this community. So that is that. And I don't know where to start this conversation. With everything you've just shared, where do you think is the best place to start this conversation about this topic?
Would you like to start at the level of molecular mechanisms or on systems neuroscience? Or maybe just an overview of like how drugs work in like I think I can do this quite neatly. That is that, you ingest a drug, it gets metabolized. All of this comes under pharmacology. Pharmacology being the science of exploration of how drugs, compounds that have a biological effect, how drugs interact with the body, and what effects those interactions produce. So yeah. So in pharmacology, that means everything from how it's metabolized, how it's distributed throughout the body, how this drug, once it's distributed, engages with proteins or with your tissues, and then what the outcome is of that effect, and then whether or not that outcome is good for health or bad for health, or good for health in this circumstance, bad for health in this circumstance. When it's neuropsychopharmacology, this is the bridging of how drugs act and neuroscience, i.e. how drugs act on the brain, and psychology, how we think. So that's where the term neuropsychopharmacology comes together.
Great. Just to chime in there, before we go into the details of how this works and relates with psychedelics, I'm curious on why is that important? Like, why? I was thinking about the viewer, and I was like, the question was coming up, like, why should I care about this? if you're passionate about it, great, but why should I care? Why is this important in general?
In the context of medicalization, the reason to understand the neuropsychopharmacology is so that we can predict how a drug might work for people, and that therefore you can understand, and intuit perhaps, well, if I'm taking this drug and this drug has this effect, then they might interact in a certain way. Maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe I should do that, or devise experiments in your mind. Not condoning that, but just that's what I think is interesting about it. And it also can guide us to consider the effects of things that are very ethereal or experiential, and map that onto what happens in the physical realm, and then create hypotheses that we can then test of how the physical realm and spirit realm and mind realm interact with each other. That's what I think is interesting about it anyway. Mm-hmm. And then ideally, it can lead us to having some like crazy technological leapfrogging where it's like, when this phenomenon happens, it links with this thing that we can measure in the physical realm, and therefore, maybe this is the case, and we can create technologies. It's like science is kind of like pulling things in the physical realm into the mental realm where we can like create and come up with ideas, and then like testing that back into the physical realm, and that's like where development and innovation happens. Mm-hmm. Why would it be interesting to you? Maybe if you want to talk to your doctor about it. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you want to sound really smart in front of your friends. Maybe it teaches you something. It actually teaches you something about your own experience. This was a lot of the feedback that I had from people who saw my talk, where I was articulating the neuropsychopharmacology of psilocybin in a way that was accessible, through illustration and storytelling and analogy to broad audiences at festivals around the summer. And people were saying, like, understanding the actual physical mechanism has shed a new light on what I experienced. And also it's how we can work with these compounds. Like, for example, we were talking earlier, and it's like, we know that there's the opening of a critical period, as has been demonstrated through the mechanisms of oxytocin and neurons in the brain. During this period, after you take a certain compound, so we can use that period, we need to consider how we use that period of time. It's like learning more about the tools that we're working with, and therefore how to amplify the benefits or have the effects that we want. It's like using any tool. Maybe you want to know how it works, and then you can get the most out of it. Don't know if anyone's used Photoshop here, but not knowing how it works means that I have a much more frustrating time, make lots of mistakes, and definitely don't get the most out of it that I could. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something in that.
Okay. Yeah, no, you got rolling. And so there is a potential to learn about this stuff and get something out of it. That's what I found for myself as well. It's like when I started to study it, the more I studied it, even if it was just the notion that basically we have no clue on how it works in the brain, and that the brain is a big mystery, and it's so complex, that kind of, just like the study in and of itself of the neuropharmacology of psychedelics inspired a sense of awe and wonder in me of the mystery of God's creation. And even that is great, or letting me recognize how little I know and how little we know. And as you said, then to use that knowledge that we've had so far, or the hypotheses that we have so far, and then use them in my journeys to, for example, have a deep recognition that psilocybin as a compound is safe. It's not dangerous. So I can feel safe to let go of my body and my experiences because I know the physical mechanisms are safe that are happening in my brain, in my body. These are not poisonous mushrooms. So it's I can let go more into my depth experience, for example, the ego death experience, where I feel like I'm dying, but there's a sense of centeredness and trust and surrender, an ability to surrender deeper, because I know a little bit about the neuropharmacology. Because when I first started taking psychedelics, I heard about that they were safe, but I didn't integrate that knowledge. So I took 5 grams in silent darkness, and I thought I was dying because I ate poisonous mushrooms. And so great. So yeah, lots of potential on why it's important to actually study that field and be curious about that topic.
Yeah, if your audience is interested in psychedelics, then they're probably quite interested in how they work and how the world, what is the world? And it's psychedelics and science are both exploring what is going on in here. And I think understanding these processes makes experiencing things much more interesting. Mm-hmm. When I first got interested in neuroscience, it was, or how the brain worked mechanistically, it was because it's an experience that is so lived, more than how my liver works, for example, of thinking of I became aware, or I don't know, have no idea how this came to me, but that, that experience when you're trying to find a word, you're God damn it, I can't remember that word. And then 2 days later, you're doing something completely irrelevant. It's oh my God, that's the word that I was trying to look for however long ago. That is because you can see it's all mirrored in how the brain works. It's, a neuron started a mission and started sending a signal, the request was sent out and then blah, 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 it went the long way round. And then at a time that's not necessarily useful, you've got the piece of information, those 2 neurons are linked. And then because that neuron sent off the signal and this neuron is for neuroscientists out there, I know it's not just one neuron, but this cluster has fired in response to this one signaling, then a bridge is formed between it, and then the next time you're trying to recall that word in that context, it comes quicker. Mm-hmm. I just think it makes being human way more interesting. This, it's a reflection of who we are and how we operate, and psilocybin and how it changes the way that the brain works says a lot about what it's teaching us. Its teachings are reflected in how the mind is working. It's all about hierarchies.
Okay. Wow. Okay, so then what has the study of the neuropharmacology of psychedelics and psilocybin specifically showed you? What came out of this, for yourself?
What came out of it for me is that it's obviously all about connection and connectedness, and that there's parts of my psyche or how my brain is operating that often are not making it to my conscious perspective or my perception, my conscious experience. But they're happening anyway in my brain. And that the difference in my perception that arises with psilocybin is a result of being aware of activity that's usually being suppressed.
Okay.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah. And the way that I'm usually operating is blocking a lot of awareness in me. And that there's value in that in my usual waking life, but that there's also value in being aware that it's present.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just to study the brain in and of itself, and the theories that I just came across. So I don't know how true those are, but it's
you can fact check these with me, please.
That the brain is kind of like a prediction making machine. We're just constantly, basically just predicting reality, and then these psychedelics, they act as a breaking of that prediction to see what's actually there. At times that's overly simplified, but yeah, to link that to awareness is a crucial one, because I'm curious about awareness. I'm curious about, my perception, reality, understanding it, and how I can progress on my journey of self-realization. So linking that to neuropharmacology and understanding how psychedelics or the functions of the brain can facilitate that increase of awareness is very fascinating. Okay, and also just I wanted to mention is like if you're watching this and you're like a bit confused of like these terms, because I know that I didn't pay attention in biology class. Like I literally hadn't had biology all my whole life in school. And then when I learned about psychedelics and the neuropharmacology, and I was listening to Andrew Gallimore's course about psychedelics in the brain, and I took like 80 pages of notes. It literally started with my acknowledgement that I don't know anything about the brain, and even like, what is a neuron? Like, how does a neuron work? How does it move along in my brain? Like, what is this? Like, what is a cluster? What is it? Like, starting from scratch to kind of like say, like, humble yourself and say, like, okay, if I like science or not, like, there is some information out there, and I might be willing to start from scratch and expose and build that foundation of having a few models and a few theories, which we can't go into this like short podcast and this short presentation, to get a foundation of understanding about this field that is like present in our society, to then engage in deeper conversations, because all of these terms now make sense for me because I know what a neuron is, I know what it does, and then we can kind of like go further and deeper into the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this balancing point, right, of like being in this bubble of scientists who all share a similar terminology and who kind of know what they're talking about, to take the conversation a little bit deeper and like get to the deeper layers of the complexity that is unraveling in this whole study, and then bringing that to the masses and actually say like, okay, how do I explain this to a 3-year-old or somebody who doesn't know anything about neuropharmacology? And that's kind of like what I feel like is your work with the presentations as well, making it accessible to people and saying like, hey, this is like really simply presented now, but hopefully it makes sense to you.
Yeah, and understanding it more, like those mechanisms, has allowed me to develop analogies that I think actually make a lot more sense. And it's helped me to make, like, the more I've learned, actually, the more I've been able to simplify it. And as you say, about the theorizing, it is kind of, like, you can have the user information. It's trying to work out, like, what people actually want to know. Like, if you just want to know the answer of, like, how do I use this in an effective way, you might not need to know all of the ins and outs behind it. But if you then want to theorize and experiment, that's when understanding things on a deeper level might be useful. And it's literally, again, mirroring the way that the brain is working, of like, okay, you don't need to know this, so just focus. Like, we're just going to give you what you need to know.
Yeah.
And then, it's like that.
Yeah.
But once having the education that gives kind of like entry into those conversations where you're all sort of playing tennis or, like science idea theorizing at the same level or a similar-ish level, and able to have those conversations, it is so fun. It is so fun. It's one of my favorite things about being in spheres of scientists, but also one of the things that I like to why I like to have conversations with that mix scientists and non-scientists, because it's like, hold on, do you realize that, or like, aren't people asking questions that might not occur to scientists because they're kind of so wrapped up in like, oh, we all share this belief. And I love the experience of awe, which is also why I love adventure and adventure into consciousness, and being like, oh my god, it makes so much sense, or oh my god, I've been seeing things in such a blinkered way, or maybe this is the way that this works. And whether it's understanding like physical biology, physical geography, like how the sea and the rocks and stuff like all work together to create the shape, and be like looking at the shape of the rock and being like, wow, I wonder if this is how this formed. Or it's how my mind is working and painting the experience that I'm having of being a human being. It's cool to be able to theorize.
Interesting. Interesting, because it's like my mind is working in a way where it's not that passionate about this. Like it's more like focusing on the appreciation and just the love of the mystery. What I then deepen in my psychedelic experiences. So it's great to see, but there are other minds who are like super fascinated by trying to figure out all the parts and like understanding and bringing that understanding into language and into models or concepts to present it, and that has its kind of like its own beauty to it. So to kind of bring the conversation back to the neuropharmacology of psychedelics, what are the greatest bits and blobs that you would like to share with the world regarding your insights in this field and everything you've learned so far? Yeah, I'm curious.
That the network that has been termed the default mode network, because of the fact that it is its activity relates to us doing basically nothing, like in an MRI scanner, i.e. the context in which one is actually looking at the brain's activity. This network is the network that seems to be most disrupted with a psychedelic experience. It also seems to be the network that's activity is most pronounced when people have a state of depression and anxiety and very like self-referential experiences. And it's also a network that's activity is dampened in a similar-ish way to psychedelics when people meditate a lot. So that this whole conversation about ego and letting go of self and acceptance and all of this is being backed up by what we're seeing in the brain and in neuroscience. Mm-hmm. Like that the part of the brain that tells this, like basically seems to have activity that relates to the story of who I am and self-absorption and thinking about other people's perceptions of me, which is easily done when making a YouTube video. This activity seems to be linked with ill health. Mm-hmm. In terms of people having uncomfortable experiences of life. And perhaps actually is the seat where masks arise from, and we feel blocked from other people and disconnected. And it's all kind of coming back to these ancient principles that have been present in humanity for eons, and practices that reduce self-centeredness. And it's all just being backed up by like the cutting edge of science. It's kind of funny. Mm-hmm. That psychedelics, this one actually excites me quite a lot. That psychedelics, they don't just act on the brain, they act across the body on any tissue that they're exposed to, and that has their the receptors or the proteins that they interact with present. And one of those tissues is the immune system. So there's been really profound effects observed on the immune system by psychedelics. And that those effects are super complicated in themselves, in that the same psychedelics, so psilocybin, can both increase or decrease immune activity depending on the baseline state of one's immune system, like how much inflammation you have at baseline, will influence whether it's pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. And that there's been this study that's shown really profound effects on asthma, like even like the reversing of scar tissue in models of asthma in animals. And I think that's really friggin' cool. That there's biological measures that relate to the afterglow, and like changes in gene expression, changes in the microbiome, etc., like long after you've had the psychedelic experience. So those like lasting changes are reflected in the biology. And this thing that I mentioned earlier about the critical period, this is the work of Gul Dolan, who I think is a wonderfully balanced researcher. And that the duration after a psychedelic experience in which there's a change in how the brain responds to oxytocin, which is she considers to be reflective of a critical period being a period in which your mind is particularly able to absorb or change information or the way that it functions, and after which it's kind of set. That is reflects the duration of the psychedelic experience itself, like the subjective effects in humans. So like the longer the psychedelic effect, the longer the opening of the critical period, and then that closes at a certain point afterwards. So just that there's a backup really of how important integration is.
Mm-hmm.
After your psychedelic experience, that it can just go down the pan or not. And this also links with what I was saying about the immune system, because your immune system, or the microglia, which are the cells that basically have immune system activity in the brain, they influence whether your neurons are like those new pathways remain open or remain closed after the psychedelic experience. So any new avenues of thoughts that might have been opened, whether or not they remain open, and whether or not your old pathways of thoughts remain open, is all affected by the immune system. Obviously, you missed the best bit.
Okay, I was not aware and the camera was cut off after 30 minutes, so excuse me about that. We were in the middle of a really
and
cool...
it got really good!
Road analogy,
obviously.
And we had a fantastic conversation afterwards. So if you want to hear all about it, like join the Psychedelic Actualization community and also check out Molly's work, so you can connect with her and check out her talks at the festivals she is at. Maybe talking or
yeah,
like
who
conferences,
knows? Ideally,
or
like
who knows whatever you're up to. And yeah, it got really interesting. We're just wrapping it up with the I don't remember what I said, with the notion that, forget about the road analogy, which was really good. With the notion that there's like an embrace of paradox in those realms of working with these higher and higher dimensions of DMTX, absolute 5-MeO DMT breakthrough experience, and then the recognition that the brain is an illusion, but still trying to work in this illusionary realm of physics and chemistry and biology.
I think I said something like using science to have enough evidence to have faith, but not enough evidence that we don't need to have faith, and then also recognizing about that if we are dependent upon the tools that we have to measure things, then we're kind of limiting ourselves by the advancement of those tools in our perception of what's possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that when we started filming this, I said something about how the gold happens when we're...
Yeah.
You said, the challenge of like, and it cuts off and then...
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, that's when the good stuff happens, when you realise that you've not been recording.
God, did I make like a
You're
really
like,
good take?
wow, I'm really coming out with amazing... Oh, it's because it's not recording.
Exactly, that is what was happening.
Life, you're so good.
Exactly, yeah. We're both getting hungry, so I would like to wrap it up with...
Scram.
What would you like to leave the viewer with? Like, what's something you're like, wow, okay, this really wraps it up and brings it into to bigger picture with my whole expertise around the field of neuropharmacology, because it's such a big one. Yeah.
Everything is an analogy for everything, I think, and neuropsychopharmacology is not an exception to this. If anything, demonstrates it very much so. Even if you look at how the brain functions and how mycelium function. There's some pretty strong parallels there. Like the movement of electrical activity and then transferring from one thing to another through chemicals, like, for example, the movement of information through mycelia and then mushrooms having chemicals that then transfer information. I don't know, I just think, I wonder what in your field matches with what's in my field in terms of the principles that might be the same, especially when we're thinking about this topic of psychedelics, because that's kind of the beauty of it, is that there's this opportunity to recognize the importance and value of looking at things in a 360 kind of perspective, and that the reason that we're all here together is because I can only see things from my perspective. And if I can communicate without blockages in the way with someone else of like, no, I see a door, and you're like, no, I really see
A roof.
whatever's over there. Yeah, I really see a roof. And I'm like, no, man, it's a door. If maybe from where you're sitting, you see a roof, I can paint a much better picture of what's going on in my sphere and like what I'm experiencing. So, yeah, be curious if you want to be. Don't do anything that anyone tells you to do unless it resonates. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that we all function in such different ways. Like, we both have obviously similar interests, but as you commented, the way that I'm approaching a problem or a solution is very different from yours. And like, there's such richness in if we all function together, like a cell, and the way that all those proteins collaborate together could be a model for how to build our society in a way that's cohesive. Yeah, there's information about the whole universe in everything. So
yeah, that's what the psychedelics are showing, right? The macrocosm is the microcosm, the microcosm is the macrocosm. It's all infinite. Like on my phone that popped up this article of like, what are electrons made of? And we just zoom in infinitely more and more and more, and we just it's infinity, and then we zoom out infinitely more, and we zoom out into the physical cosmos, but also into the infinity of the cosmos of our minds with the psychedelics, and it's all interconnected, and it's such a beauty and such a fascination that comes out of this curiosity. That's where kind of like all of religion, all of like science is being born out of this like curiosity of the human mind. So
and we can't know it all. Like what makes me curious and interests me is perhaps what I have the capacity to use for the benefit of everyone. And so follow what really interests you, and then we can meet in the middle and share notes.
Great. Awesome. That's it for today. Check out the other video we did together. You can watch it right over there. There's a link. And yeah, check out Molly's work. Join the school community. Book a free one-on-one call with me. Any last words?
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Let's have lunch.
Yo, bon appetit!